Now let's talk currencies again with Joseph Tan, Chief Asian Economist at Credit Suisse Private Bank. Joseph, just to bring up a question that was sent to us by one of our viewers, he wants to know why the British pound continues to trend higher, and you think whether you think this will continue.
Well, I think, Haslinda, clearly we've talked about this during the break, that it's not really the fundamentals that's driving the sterling higher. It's really, I would put it as a beauty pageant of fairly ugly contestants. It depends, who really comes out ugly.
And
at
the dollar is looking really ugly at this point in time.
I think the dollar looks very, very ugly at this stage. I mean, if you look at the quantitative easing program undertaken by the Federal Reserve and you cross-check that with the Bank of England, clearly the size doesn't even quite compare because the Fed is so much bigger. And I think that this easing and the ability, of course, to further buy back on U.S. Treasuries and to buy back on the monetization of debt, which is what the market is really concerned about. And I think also as well, the dollar has another point of view in the sense that you will probably be very concerned about what the BRIC central banks are saying, Brazil, Russia, India, China, talking about trying to find another reserve currency. And I think that potentially as well could cast a secular decline for the U.S. dollar. So it's really a contestant, a beauty pageant of ugly contestants, and I think that in this regard, the sterling is actually less ugly than the US dollar.
Okay, the market's seeing some kind of correction right now, giving a fair boost to the dollar. How long do you think this dollar strength will last before it slumps again? I
think you'll probably see dollar strength for the next 2 months or so because the equity market is clearly correcting after about 3 months of gains. So I think this short-term pullback in terms of equities will be positive for the US dollar as risk appetite fades. But beyond that, I think you'll probably see the major currencies, euro, sterling, as well as the Aussie, picking back up again versus the US dollar.
Okay, Aussie, Kiwi, both economies seem to be somewhat stabilizing. Implications on both currencies?
Well, I think the Aussie is probably going to stay around about the 80 cents versus the US dollar in the short term. I think going further out, you'll probably see it try to test 85. But I think it'll be a long stretch before it gets up to 90 again. Similarly for the Kiwi as well, around about the 65 sort of level, 70 is possible. But again, it's going to be a big stretch to try to see significant gains in this currency. But clearly, they will be definitely performing better than the US dollar.
Okay, so fair to say in the longer term, as far as the Aussie Kiwi, possibly even the Canadian dollar, will be trending in line with the movements of commodities, correct?
Correct. I think in the short term as well, we're starting to see some kind of weakness in the commodities market in line with the greater theme that we talked about, which is a fading of risk appetite. We're seeing equities actually being impacted. We're also seeing some kind of weakness in the commodities market. And so I think in the short term, clearly these currencies will be underperforming versus the US dollar. I think probably the next 1 or 2 months, you'll probably see that kind of retracement. But after that, I think you'll definitely gain back again versus the US dollar.
And you mentioned about the BRIC nations slightly earlier. I mean, China and Russia have come out to say that perhaps they want to do their trades in their respective currencies. There's been little impact on the dollar on that. Why is that?
Well, I think for now the markets seem to read it as just rhetoric. But, the tick data that we saw, the recent one, saw actually a rather significant drop in terms of the purchases of US dollar assets. We definitely need to watch this because if the BRIC countries, and together with Japan as well, decide to buy less of dollar assets, clearly this is the start of a longer-term decline in the US dollar.
And let's talk about reserve currency. I had a discussion with a currency analyst yesterday as well, who said that, if you take a look at what a reserve currency should do, I mean, the attributes of a reserve currency, I mean, the euro could possibly be an alternative.
Clearly, I think it's possible that the euro could be an alternative as well. If you think about the oil markets, clearly some of this is highly correlated with the euro as well. So the euro is a very firm contender versus the US dollar for a reserve currency.
But there is a but.
There is definitely a but. I think, the world is so used to trading in the US dollars for so many years, and I think it will be very difficult to switch out of that in the short term. And also as well, the depth of the treasury market and the breadth of which as well is very difficult to replace. We're not really seeing a similar comparable debt capital market in the Eurozone or even in the UK, for example. So I think, you do need to get a very deep market to be able to absorb the foreign exchange reserves of Asia as well as the Middle East, which are very massive.
Joe, what currencies do you like? What currencies should we hold?
Well, I think we quite like Asian currencies in this environment because Asian currencies have the stability of the foreign exchange reserves that they have built up over the years. Also, at the same time as well, Asian currencies, if you look
Asian currencies like?
Well, I like the Indonesian rupiah. I think there has been quite a lot of positive news coming from the country as a result of the political developments there.
Elections?
The elections, yes. I think the market is very positive on the rupiah. At the same time as well, do not forget they have got pretty good yield, and that's the reason why you're seeing the rupiah actually move to test 10,000, and it's going to certainly go lower. I think the rupiah probably can go to 9,500, possibly even 9,000 on a 12-month horizon.
Apart from rup?
Well, apart from rup, I think, always stick with the ones that are quite liquid and easy to trade within Asia. I think Singapore dollar as well is one that, a lot of, that you have seen so far recently.
It hardly moves.
Well, look at it this way. I mean, it went up. It's the stability that you are really, trying to get out of that, And I think that it's one of the reasons why the strength of the Singapore dollar, the faith behind, the system as well. I think that's a pretty good one as well. Of course, you're not talking about yield, but you're really talking about stability. I quite like the Philippines peso as well. Yeah.
Okay, so Sing dollar, peso, as well as the Indonesian rupiah, the choice of our guest today, Joseph Tan, Credit Suisse. Thank you so much for that.